Well, greetings and salutations. I apologize for the delay. If you guys can hear me, give me a thumbs up. If you guys can hear me and see me, give me a thumbs up, please. Hey, Chloe, can you shut the door all the way? Coco, can you shut the door all the way? Can you shut the door all the way? Okay. Yay! All right. I apologize. I had a work meeting and that ran a little long, and then I had to grab something to eat finally and get all my notes put together because they were kind of all over the place. Well, today, if you hadn't seen already in the community page, I put that poll up to see whether or not Christians should vote, and I made it binary, right? It's a binary yes or no. You didn't get any other options. I know a lot of people put in their own comments and stuff, but let me see where we are at with that. So we had 1,300 votes. 1,386% said yes, 14% said no, and a ton of comments. And I did see them. I didn't get a chance to read through everything. I've just been running pretty hard the last few days. Well, hey, it's good to be here with you guys. Pastor Gary, I see Pamela, Michelle, Jika, await him, Lori, Heather's Hearth, Southern Sunshine, Colleen, Kathy B, Donna C, Sir Pierce the Veil, KG Saved by Grace, or Faith and Grace, Diane Williams. Hello to all. I just wanted to say that I appreciate your time, and I want to get started really quick because I know you've been waiting already. Just really quick updates. On Wednesday the 7th, I'll be on with Pastor Gary at 1 p.m. at, let's see, 1 p.m. Central Time. If I'm not, should be Central Standard Time. Hey, Mom, I see you there. And then I'm recording something that same day with Ken Michaels. Actually, I'm confused here now. I'm recording something with Ken, and then that'll go out on Understanding the Times, I think, the day after. And then I am going to be on with Dave Fiorosa on Thursday the 8th at around noon. So another busy week. And yeah, so meeting with the boss for work, and that went a little long. And so we're going to get rolling here. Let's see. John Bellum, I see you, brother. Bobby, Allison, Coco Bear, Tom L. Well, hello to everybody. I'm glad that you're here. We're going to talk about political stuff today. We are going to discuss voting since we are in an election year. And I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about this topic. And I'm not saying this to besmirch anybody else. This is just my opinion. This is just how I see things. I'm not, please don't run to somebody else and say that I said this, that, or the other. I honestly, this is how I feel, and this is how I feel from a biblical perspective. You vote your conscience, you vote or not vote. I'm just telling you right now that I'm a proponent of voting. I'm not going to try and talk you out of voting. I think as citizens, we should vote. We should exercise that right to vote. And I want to go through some reasoning here for you. Um, so if we look back over the last 300 years, I mean, when we think about the founding fathers and just the mindset of that time, how were they so much more um morally I don't want to say more saved. They were a more moral society in a way. They were much more cognizant of their faith and how their faith impacted everything they did, whether it was education, government, how they did business, how they ran their families. I mean, their faith was central to everything. And I think between then and now, I mean, we're still the same humans. We haven't changed. We haven't gotten smarter or dumber. I think that the things have, in terms of us physically speaking, we're here. We haven't. We're still humans in that sense of the word. I don't know what has changed since then, and I know what changed, but I'm just saying that we have gotten dumber in the sense because that's been intentional from the education system, but we're still capable of those great things that we were then. We're just not doing them. And so I think that that's the big issue for me is like what's changed since from then till now. And I think what's changed is obviously been this agenda afoot that's been used to dumb down the masses. It's been used to get us to become apathetic. We've had a great deal of uh, I don't want to say wealth, but we've, as a society, as a people, we've become far wealthier than any people that's ever lived in human history. I mean, just the fact that if you have ice cubes in your house or you can have a drink with ice in it, I mean that's a luxury that kings were only afforded back in the Middle Ages. So in the ancient times, so we have a higher standard of living per se than what they had then. But what's changed? I mean, we're still humans. We're still roughly, same height on average, same weight, same, kind of all those things are considered are still roughly the same. And what's changed is the fact that there has been a not just a dumbing down of the American population, but there has been an intentional um I want to say this twice. There's been this wall erected, at least since 1947, uh, where people have ignorantly, and I'm putting that politely, believed that there is a separation of the church and state in the Constitution. And what that did was it began to drive churches, the churches began to pull away from public discourse and pull away from the public arena of ideas and begin to segregate themselves into their own little church buildings and denominations and whatnot. And I think that is where the rapid decline began with regard to the free fall we are in society with morals and ethics and everything else we've seen happen. And so I want to say that, and we'll go through some of the Constitution stuff here in a second, but the I, there's been this free fall in society. And when we think back to the 1950s, we kind of think about those as the golden era of the United States. Right after World War II, up through the early 1960s, there was this time of Americana where uh, we look back on and think of fondly. And I know many of you were there alive in the 1950s, and you might have different ideas. And I'm just saying from a younger person's perspective, what we look back on, we're thinking like Leave It to Beaver, and obviously, real life wasn't Leave It to Beaver, but we kind of categorize the 1950s in that way. And I feel like that generation, the greatest generation, is somewhat to blame in respect to going along with this idea that politics and religion shouldn't be discussed in polite company, that the church needed to stay in its lane. It needed to it was all this kind of self-censorship that began to take place within American Christian denominations. And I think it largely stemmed from the 1947 board versus what decision was that? It was the Everson versus the Board of Education 1947 case. And I feel like churches have become very trigger shy, gun shy with regard to beginning to speak out publicly from the pulpit, unless it's from a very leftist perspective. And that's where we start to see the rise of the social justice gospel and all the other issues going on. But let me just say that this decline in Christian participation in the political arena over the governance of our United States is it's been a long time coming. It's been going on since the 1940s, and I think right now we're at this kind of crisis point that you've got in terms of the Christian population. Half of the population is saying, "Guys, we got to wake up. We've got to get. We're going to lose our country. This is it. I mean, if we don't win this election, it's done. The United States will no longer exist like it has in the past." And as I did the video with Lee Brainerd a couple Fridays ago, one of the issues that I raised, and I raised this to Lee early on, I was like, I feel like based off of like that John Rich interview, that's kind of the mindset in the Tucker Carlson and others. That's the mindset where uh, the pre-trib camp in particular is going to be increasingly hated by the left and the right for different reasons, but primarily because of this our lack of activity or we're not pulling our weight in the political side of the arena. So this is a very complex issue in terms of the different fields, the different perspectives, the different audiences, and how they react to whether or not we should participate, politically speaking. And I have my opinions. I know everybody in the chat has their opinions. I'm just presenting my side of it and how I see things. And if you happen to agree, fine. If you happen to disagree, that's fine too. I mean, we can still be friends. But I want to share some things because I've heard a lot of talk about this, and there's some things that haven't been discussed either that I feel like, okay, let's if we're going to talk about this topic, let's put it all on the table. Let's lay it all out there and kind of go from there. So I wrote some things down here the other day, and I know one of the biggest concerns that I've heard, or complaints I've heard, concerns and complaints, is that a lot of folks are saying, "Well, I can't vote for Donald Trump because he supports abortion." That's probably the most common one. Another one that I've heard is that Donald Trump has had past associations in the gambling business and pornography or into the women and things like that because he was friends with Hugh Hefner, and he had ties in with the different casinos and all the things associated with that. I've heard, just this is all over the internet, but like people are saying that he's not a moral man. He is not this. He's not that. And so you hear all those complaints, but then on the other side of the aisle, you have an absolutely 100% anti-Christian, anti-Israel, anti-family, um, normal, anti-everything, uh, anti-pro-life. They basically are the polar opposite of everything that Christians want or should support. And so I feel like there is we're increasingly put into this tough decisions as to whether or not we should support what many would call the lesser of two evils. I mean, they're both evil, and one's just a little lesser than that. And I hear that quite a bit. And so I want to give y'all some perspective today, and hopefully this will help make your decision. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I want you to kind of hear all of this too, because I feel like we're getting bits and pieces here and there, but we're not seeing really the whole picture. And let me just start off and say, hopefully, like I am 100% committed to being a monarchist. Like I really just want Jesus to come back because he is the only one that can fix any of this. The Republican Party can't fix this. The Democrats can't fix this. Trump can't fix this. Uh, the United Nations can't fix this. It's 100% Christ is the one that has to fix this world because at the root of all of the problems that we have is sin, man's sinful nature. And until that is changed and corrected and dealt with, it doesn't matter what system we put up, it's going to become corrupted. Now, with that said, I also believe that we're in the season of the Lord's return. I feel like it's very, very soon. I just don't know when. And I think anybody that can pinpoint a day and say he's coming back here, they're lying to you. None of us know. We can know the season, and I believe Scripture supports that idea and that reasoning, but we're not going to know the specific day or hour. And we may be years off still. I'm hoping that it's today or tomorrow, but it may be next year, maybe the year after. It could be 10 years. We just simply don't know. And with all the reasoning that I have and the research that I have, I feel like it's close. I feel like it's closer rather than later, sooner rather than later. But would I pay? Would I bet my mortgage on it? No, I mean, because none of us can know. But with that said, I feel like over the last 70 plus years within American Christendom, there has been a pulling away and an intentional forcing a separation there between the church writ large, and I'm talking about all the denominations, as well as even other faiths that hold to have strong morals or whatever. Um, a separation between that and then everything that's done on in the political side of America. And as I alluded to earlier, there was a Supreme Court decision, Everson versus the Board of Education, and in that decision, the Supreme Court in this landmark case held that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment was applicable to the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. And so Justice Hugo Black wrote that the First Amendment created a wall of separation between church and state. Now, uh, we know going back to the actual Constitution, whether the Bill of Rights or to the Declaration of Independence. Well, the Declaration of Independence assigns that all of our rights come from God. They come from our Creator, not from man, not from government. The only thing that can be tied to that time period in terms of the separation of church and state, which is not in the Constitution, is Thomas Jefferson's letters to the Danbury Baptist, where he used that phrase, the separation. And you got to remember at the time in the state of or the colony of Maryland, that was established as a Catholic state. So Roman Catholicism was the official like religion of that state. How we were going to go forward as a nation, like you can't say that the government, Congress or the Senate can't declare Texas is going to be a Southern Baptist state, and then Utah is going to be a Mormon state, and then Maryland can be a Catholic state, and this state can. That's what was the intent, that the government cannot establish this criteria over the states and say you are going to be, or even the states themselves can't declare we are a Jehovah Witness state or we are a a Pentecostal state. They can't do that, and that's where the First Amendment comes in, where there is no, just read it here. Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So if the government came out and said, okay, Maryland is going to be a Roman Catholic state, no other religions are allowed to practice their faith in Maryland other than Catholic, then obviously this is what the Constitution is dealing with within the First Amendment. But this idea has been so corrupted and perverted and abused that now it has completely washed any mention of Christ or God out of everything that's public government, education, etc. Anything that comes from public funds has to be completely have God removed from that. And so that is where this idea has become corrupted, and that was not the intent of that. And then inside of this window, say from the 1940s onward, churches began to take that and basically use that as the reasoning for not getting involved in things. Well, when the church pulled out of the public arena of ideas, some of it was by force, some of it was of their own volition. It creates a vacuum. And when you create a vacuum, something is going to fill that vacuum. And what filled that vacuum is human secularism and Eastern mysticism and paganism. And all of those things come under the umbrella of what we would call postmodernism, where there's no objective truth. Everything, whatever's true in your eyes is true. And so that is where we've been living under, increasingly so for every decade that's passed. And so human secularism, which under that has atheism, agnosticism, paganism, et cetera, is a belief system. It is a belief system in every bit of the word as the same as being Southern Baptist or being Catholic or being, uh, uh, Calvary Chapel or whatever. It's a belief system. And so we're having what we've had. The church has voluntarily stepped back away from having any say in public discourse, and in stepping back, we've self-censored ourselves. We've submitted ourselves to the censorship of the state, and then allowed for another belief system to come in, and then because they don't call themselves a religion in the official sense of the word, they get away with controlling all of it. So that's really where we are today in terms of we've been under this system now for 70 years, and it feels, if I were a clergy, it would feel weird to talk politically from the pulpit because you're just so used to it not doing it. But that's the dilemma that we're in today. And so when I say that, what I hear from a lot of folks who say they can't vote for Trump is because they don't think he's a godly man. And I'm not saying that he is or he isn't. I'm just saying that's the most common excuse I hear. Um, but recognize that if you have a pool of candidates that hold to your same standard of values, biblical values, that pool has over the last 70 years shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And so by the time, if you're running for a local election, that's fine. Local elections, you can still basically still win elections at the local level and still be a strong evangelical Christian. But the further you expand that territory out that you're going to be in charge of, if you're running for state and then federal positions, your chances of winning increasingly shrink because your values don't represent the values of the larger and larger populations that you would come to represent. And that's why we see so many of these politicians have to compromise or they remain silent about what they really believe because they have to build the largest coalition they can of voters to vote for them so they can even get into office. Because now the population isn't 80% Christian or whatever it was in the 1940s or whatever people identified as back then. It's significantly higher than it is today. And as the population becomes less and less Christian, the more that those Christians who do want to run have to compromise what they believe, or they remain silent on issues and you really don't know where they stand one way or the other, or they may run as a Christian or run as an evangelical, but they have to remain silent when it comes to hot button issues. And so I feel like that's where we are in terms of political candidates today. And so I know that we've heard a lot of talk that we're stuck in this binary system. And I mentioned this in previous live streams, but our system was put under this binary system a long time ago to avoid what we see going on in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe and Israel and other places where you have all these tiny little parties, and these tiny little parties are each independently their own parties, and they every election they have to try and build a coalition and try to take the majority of the parliament or the majority of the Knesset or the majority of whatever in order to put their candidate as the prime minister or as the president or whatever. We don't function like that because our coalitions are already built into those two parties, with the exception of independent candidates like Ross Perot or now RFK Jr. For the most part, if you're a Democrat, it used to be going back in the 1800s. I mean, they were the party of the South. They were the party of the Confederacy, pro-slavery, pro-states' rights. They wanted very little federal involvement at all. They just wanted the states to run themselves. And the Republicans came about around the same time, the 1850s, and said we were anti-slavery and strong federal government, et cetera, et cetera. And we've seen how this has played out since. Now, I'd say every time that there's a political shift where a large portion of a base of that party begins to move to the other side, that's where we start to see a lot of these disruptions within society. And this has happened about 4 or 5 times. But just for example, for the Black community, the Republican Party was their party from about the 1860s all the way up until the 1950s, right? And even through the 1950s, the Republican Party was trying to champion civil rights stuff, movements and acts and things. And then that got increasingly squashed by the Democrats, to include Lyndon Baines Johnson. But somewhere in the right after the Kennedy assassination, there was a reversal. The Democrats wholly embraced civil rights uh, to the very much extreme to create what they called the Great Society, which opened up, basically created a welfare state. And from that moment forward, they kept promising minorities, "Hey, we're going to give you all this stuff. We owe you all this stuff," and they've kept us in this cycle of dependency increasingly every election that's come about since then. And so we saw the shift from the Black community from the Republican Party into the Democrat Party in the 1960s. And then now we're starting to see that shift back from the Black communities back into the Republican Party, because the Democrats have been promising all this stuff, or every 4 years they've been promising them everything, and their communities keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so I think a lot of Blacks are waking up saying something's not right here. They keep telling us every year to vote this way, and then as soon as we vote, they ignore us for the next 3.5 years. And so there was a migration away from the Democrat Party. And the further left that the party has moved, the Democrats has moved, the more out of touch they are with even the Hispanic community. Hispanic community is very much in touch with their faith and with family. Those are two big things within the Hispanic community. And even Hispanics are like that, like y'all gone crazy. We don't want that, and no mas. And so they're moving over to the Republican Party. And those rich white, I don't want to say white, but the rich corporations and all of that had traditionally been part of the national security group coalition, the Forever Wars kind of coalition, the neocons, and all that had been under the Republicans for many decades, now has shifted back over to the Democrats. So we're starting to swap people. And when we do that, there's a great amount of instability that happens within a society, because the Democrats don't want to let their side go. And the Republicans are now having to contend with this change of dynamics within their own parties. So there's a great deal of turmoil happening right now as the coalitions inside of these two parties are beginning to move places and have been for a number of years. So if we look around today, that's why we see a lot of the chaos that we're seeing play out, is that there's these migrations within the parties that are shifting again, that are moving. And so, like I said, this has happened about 6 times just between the Democrats and the Republicans, with different groups that are moving back and forth. And each time that that happens, that always triggers about some kind of major crisis. And that's a frightening thing to think about, because that's what we see coming, and that's why I'm convinced they're going to use some crisis between now and the election to either prevent the election from happening, or from uh, obscuring it to such a degree that we can't have faith and confidence in the electoral process any longer. I think that's the intent where they're going to go with it. Now, uh, if you remember Alexander Tytler, who was a Scottish philosopher, scholar back in the 1800s, he had that cycle of nations. And he said that a nation will go from bondage to spiritual faith, and from spiritual faith to great courage, courage to liberty, liberty to abundance, abundance to selfishness, selfishness to complacency, and complacency to apathy, and then apathy back into dependence. And I think that we're in that stage now. And when we see the process from bondage all the way to liberty, that's a long process. That usually is a long process. It takes a long train of abuses that happen for finally people to get so fed up with the way it is that they rise up and stand up against the powers that be of that day, and overthrow the over in an attempt to overthrow the injustices and the tyranny that they see. But the process from liberty to apathy is also kind of a long process as well. It takes This is the creep of apathy that happens, that in our abundance we begin to pull back away from things and just try to enjoy life. Our focus isn't on the betterment of mankind necessarily. It's on increasingly, like, what can I get out of this system? What can I get out for me? What can I get out for my family? uh, how much can I retire on? They're trying to capitalize on the wealth aspect of it now, because now it's accessible, it's within reach, and people want that. Um, and if you remember back to a quote from John Adams, he said that our Constitution was only made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And so I think where we are today, we're at this between a rock and a hard place, between a society that can no longer uh, function underneath the Constitution that we have. I mean, think about all the rules and the laws that have come about just in the last 100 years, and the taxes and everything else. It's increasingly become so um, draconian that I would say that the founding fathers would not recognize our nation at all today. I mean, by any stretch of the imagination. I would say that even in the 1950s, if you were to transport them in time from then till now, they would not recognize today. Um, and so I feel like we're probably already too far gone, because it doesn't look like Christianity is going to have this massive revival and change the direction or trajectory of our nation. And we know, according to Scripture, that things will go from bad to worse, and there is not any type of massive national or global revival prior to the rapture of the church. There will be one immediately after, when people come to faith after that. But in the time we're in now, it doesn't appear to be that way. So here we are, 2024. We are 248 years roughly since the official founding of our nation. His cycle of nations Tytler had was around 250 years was the average for nations to survive. And I feel like we are right there. We're right there at the cusp of where things are about to have this massive transformation. And whether that happens prior to the rapture or not, um, that's where my argument is going to lie, roughly where we are today. And so I know that a lot of teachers, preachers, theologians, etc., have their opinions on things. And I just want to echo something that uh, has been said quite a bit. I've said it too, that we're not voting in a pastor in chief. We are not voting in a Messiah in chief. We're not voting in a great religious leader or spiritual leader. We're voting in a politician, and this politician sets the policies that we have to live under from now until the rapture, whenever that may be. And you have to just ask yourself, which system do I want to live under in the remaining time that we have here? And again, we don't know how much time that is. That could be a day, a week, a month, 5 years, 10 years. We simply don't know. And, I grew up when I was the first president that I really remember is Reagan. And so from 80 to 88, I lived under the Reagan years. From 89 to 92 was under Bush. And then the next 8 years after that, I spent under the Clintons. And then 8 years of the Bushes again. And then the rest of the time, or, with the exception of Trump, it's been Democrats. And I can tell you that from at least a military standpoint, it seems that anytime the Democrats are in power, there is a tremendous amount of instability in the world. Um, Increasingly so from really the Bush era forward. It seems that the neocons have moved from the Republican Party. Now they're moved over to kind of the main, the or moved from the Republicans to the main line to the Democrat side of the House. And when I say neocons, I mean like Victoria Nuland, Antony Blinken, John McCain, the Romneys, the folks that are what we call um, the permanent Washington class, and they go from uh, a, an elected position, then they go to like the board at Boeing, and they go from this position in a Secretary of State, then they might go back to um, Lockheed Martin, and they kind of keep going back in these circles where they're uh, it's very incestuous when you think about how they kind of move in and out of these positions of authority, and they're constantly in these loops. And it's in their best interest for there to be instability in the world, because that's how they make money. They sell weapon systems, and they sell surveillance systems, and they sell missiles, and they sell the technology to advance aircraft to fight wars and to do all that. So it's in their interest to have a purpose, and the purpose is we need peace and security. We need national defense. We need there's terrorism. I thought the worst thing that Bush did was, aside from the Patriot Act, he declared war on terror, which I thought was incredibly vague and dangerous, because terror can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And it's untenable, and it's also unwinnable. You can't wipe out terror any more than you can wipe out sadness, or you can wipe out drugs, or you can wipe out poverty. Um, I mean, we had a war on poverty for 40 something years, and there's more poor people today than there's ever been. So when you wage a war like that, I think that um, it gives the bad guys a lot of wiggle room to plan nefarious things. Now, going back to the pool of increasingly shrinking godly candidates, I would venture to say that the best you can hope for is to get an elected representative in Congress, in the House of Representatives, that shares your values. The chances of getting that in a president again, I mean, that's not going to happen, because of how much how big their tent. They have to bring the party together and coalesce around them, and you're talking about a giant umbrella with thousands to hundreds to thousands of different coalitions that they have to try and bring in under the same umbrella. And everybody has a different focus on what's their number one issue. Some people may be the border. Some people it may be abortion. Some people it may be national security. Some others it may be the national debt. Some people may be vaccines or the abuse thereof. A president is a figurehead for an umbrella for a group of an umbrella of coalitions, and he's got to try and represent all of their positions. It's absolutely impossible to get somebody that shares your values. They might call themselves a Christian, but when you look at everything they support or don't support, I guarantee you it's going to be different than what you want. And there's no way to win that because we're now 70 years into this withdrawal where the church withdraw from the public arena of ideas. The church has been out of the public arena for years and years, decades now. The chances of the church now reversing that and forcing themselves back into the public arena, it you would need another 50, 60 years. And it would probably take something very much akin to even a civil war for that to happen. You're talking something massive would have to change the trajectory of the nation for that to even be a possibility. And we don't necessarily see that for what we see in scripture if we are where we are on God's prophetic calendar. If we're as close to the end as we think we are, then I say that's the likelihood of that happening is not ever going to be a possibility this side of the rapture. Now, I want to look at just some things here with regard to voting. In the 2008 presidential election, excuse me, Christians made up approximately 79% of the registered voters. And when I say Christian, I mean that in the very, very broadest sense of the term. And what they would, and what the polling groups and all that, I mean, they would include everything from the Church of Latter-day Saints, Catholics, Baptists, Pentecostals, everything. Anybody that even remotely claims to be Christian, they would lump into that category. So it's probably not that high. In the 2010s, in the 2012 election, the percentage of Christians had started to decline, and significantly, really, amongst the white evangelical Protestants, because what did they have? What were their options? In 2008, it was between McCain and Obama. So McCain was, for all intents and purposes, was not a religious person at all. I don't know if he was personally. I just remember, from what I remember of him, I don't remember him ever being talked about that way. And then 2012, we had Romney, who many Christians could not support because he was a Mormon. So instead, we got Obama. And so those two different terms where Obama served for those 4 years, he seeded the biggest contribution that Obama did in destroying this nation or putting us on the trajectory you're on is by emplacing people like him throughout every strata of the government bureaucracy, through everywhere. It flooded, and now we call this the swamp, and that's really the swamp that wants to see America go down in flames, and they want something else to come up in its place, some type of global system. And so when Christians pull back out of elections, it gets worse and worse and worse. So in a fluke, and just out of the sheer desperation of the American people after 8 years of that, on top of the 8 years of Bush and the war, um, people were fed up. They were fed up with it, and that's why we got a guy like Donald Trump, and he won against all odds. Now, is Donald Trump, again, is he the Messiah? Is he religious? No, he's not a Christian that I know of. He is not a godly man. But during that time period, did he do your values more than say Hillary Clinton would have? Was he pro-family? Was he more for pro freedom of religion, where religious freedom of thought could be expressed more widely? I would say he was. Now, what we had to contend with then was the technocracy who had been emboldened by previous Democrat administrations to begin to enforce freedom of speech of their own accord with the likes of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc. They began to censor Christian thought, conservative thought, Christian thought, conservative principles, etc., to a much higher degree than they did with even recognized terrorists and terrorist organizations and other criminal and nefarious groups. So I feel like which of the two do you have the opportunity to advance the gospel more freely? Of the two, between Trump and a Clinton, I would easily would say Trump. Now, again, he is not the pastor in chief. He believes in more limited government in terms of his personal beliefs, and then that gets expressed through presidential executive decisions, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like that's kind of where that strength is with him rather than the Democrat side. The Democrats are all about completely shutting off free speech, completely shutting down churches, or driving churches underground, where you can't express your faith at all except within the walls of your church. And a great example of this is when you go back to 2020 and you look at states run by Democrats and states run by Republicans. Who was free to even meet in a church? And I'm talking about the churches where they wanted to meet, but the government or the state government came down against them and began to fine them and began to uh, issue tickets and even some arrests in places like Michigan and California, as opposed to places that were not run by Democrats, like Republican states, who we initially gave the we gave the government the benefit of the doubt and said, okay, we need 2 weeks to flatten the curve or whatever. We'll give them that. But then after that, we started to get back. We're just like, yeah, we're not putting up with that anymore. So we're just going to go back to what we were doing before. Now, some churches that self-censored themselves and remained closed down, etc., but others, most others, opened up. So think about it in those terms. If you had to go back into 2020, you had the option, which state would you rather live in, a Republican state or a Democrat state? And I'm talking about at the height of the lockdowns. And that's what you're really voting in terms of what's coming up. Um, I've heard a lot of people say that Trump is pro-abortion. Well, what he did was he said this should not be a rule writ law for everybody across. It's right inscribed in the Constitution to kill your baby. He basically elected or recommended the judges to the Supreme Court that made it into the Supreme Court, that then reversed Roe v. Wade and then pushed that back to the states. So then at the lower level, if you are, again, it's easier to put godly people into local elections, into smaller elections, because that's a smaller umbrella that you have to try and bring together if you're doing a representative of a district rather than the entire state. So I see that there's more freedom and there's more opportunity underneath a Trump administration rather than a Kamala Harris administration. Now, a lot of people say, "Well, I can't vote for him anyways. I refuse to vote for him," and that's fine. Just recognize that by not voting for him, that is, and I'm not shaming anybody into voting for Trump. I'm just saying when you don't vote, for every vote that we have, the Democrats are going to throw up probably 2 or 3 votes or maybe 5 votes, one of which is legit and the other 4 are not legit. So you're increasing the likelihood that Kamala Harris will take over. Now, I guess this is the balance, right? The tightrope we have to walk in terms of being in this world but not being of this world. I recognize that the Republican Party is not going to fix America. I recognize that Trump is not going to, or any candidate, political, left or right, is not going to fix America. I still believe that Jesus Christ is the only one that can fix what's wrong with this world. Now, I've heard a lot of leaders say, well, we can't support, if you're supporting the lesser of two evils, you're still supporting evil. Well, if that's really true and you really truly feel that way, then don't just do it with a vote. Quit paying your taxes. Look at all the money that we're sending to all over the world for bad things and evil things. If you feel that strongly about your convictions, I would say quit paying taxes. That's a stronger way to send a message than just simply not voting because you're allowing the other side to win. Now, of course, that comes with far more serious ramifications when you quit paying taxes, but it's a stronger signal for sure. If you hate Trump, fine. I would say that getting him in rather than Kamala Harris is still a far better world to live in than having her try to run the country. Because it's not just her again, it's going to be Obama and his fourth administration driving everything. That means there's more wars, more deaths, more killings, more open borders, more fentanyl coming across the border, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. I mean, the list on and on and on of death and carnage that's going to happen under a Democrat administration versus a Trump administration is going to be night and day. Is there going to be no deaths, no crimes, no anything under Trump? No, no, there is. I mean, that's just the nature of the world today. Which one is going to openly celebrate it and encourage all of that death and carnage is going to be the Democrats. They need it because they need America to collapse because they need us rolled up into this beast kingdom. And for me, I just see Trump as a orange cone in the road towards globalism. He is a slowing things down kind of thing. Is that's not stopping it altogether. But again, if you feel that strongly, instead of complaining to me on Facebook or complaining to everybody else on Facebook, and you feel that passionately about it, I would say quit paying your taxes. Just quit paying them and say, "Hey, I'm protesting because I don't agree with the ungodliness I see in the government." Now, don't blame me if you get the IRS sending you letters and start coming to your door and confiscating your materials in your house and your car and all that stuff. But I mean, it's going to cost you, right? Taking a stand is going to cost you. Now, I liken what when Jesus was posed with this question, they said, who should in terms of the money, like let me pull up the passage here because I don't want to butcher it. Here it is. Let's see. So they went to him, some of the Pharisees and the Herodians, to catch him in his words. And when they had come, they said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are true and you care about and care about no one, for you do not regard the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth." And I can imagine they're saying this somewhat sarcastically. And they said, "Is it lawful to pay tax to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay?" But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, "Why do you test me? Bring me a denarius that I may see it." So they brought it. And he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" And they said to him, "Caesar's." And Jesus said unto them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. To, so Jesus came at the probably the height of the Roman Empire in terms of its prestige, power, and prowess in the world at that time, in the world of antiquity. And he did not come in trying to change uh, Rome. He came in with a very specific mission to uh, present the kingdom to the people that it had been promised to all throughout the Old Testament, and before giving it to them, he's basically telling them that you have to be a people worthy of the kingdom. And we see that on the Sermon on the Mount. And basically, they had been expecting him to come in as this great military leader like David or Moses, and basically throw off the shackles of Gentile oppression and make them the preeminent nation in the world, like we see in Isaiah chapter 2, Isaiah 11. And instead, he came in as the suffering servant that we see in Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22. They didn't recognize that it was going to be two different comings. God knew this before he came, obviously, because he could see the end from the beginning. But they didn't understand that, and so they were trying to trip him up because he was threatening their livelihoods as the Sanhedrin and as the political influencers of their day. And they had all compromised everything underneath the Romans, just so that they could stay into power. But here he was telling them he's not calling for revolt or revolution. He's saying pay to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and to God's that which is God's. So I am not telling you not to pay your taxes. I'm saying if you feel that strongly about your convictions, then you should probably not pay your taxes, because then that's sending a real signal. Not voting is not going to send a signal except to empower the left and the other side, who will increase ungodliness to such a degree that we will all be vexed and crying out um, under the leadership of wicked leaders, like it talks about in Proverbs. So that's kind of where I see things at. 2016, Christians made up of around 81% of the vote. Um, and I'm not even going to talk about all Christians. I'm going to say white evangelical Protestants made up for about 81% of the voting, and that's when we got Trump. 2020, the voting went down for Christians again to about 64%. And this obviously gave the left enough of a window to do some nefarious things like midnight ballot dumps and shut down voting at, in 4 states the night of. It allowed for that because it was going to be close anyways. And what I'm saying here now is that it needs to be so overwhelmingly for Trump that even if they cheat, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, let's say there's 250, let's just say there's 200 million registered voters in America, and the Republicans come out in mass and vote, and Trump gets somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 million people, and the Democrats come out and they have 150 million people. Obviously, we know that that can't be true, because we could just look at the number of registered voters and we say, hey, something is way off. And that it would be so obvious at that point that there would have to be a recall, a recount. Karen Lewis says, yes, it was stolen. Yeah, I know it was stolen. And the way they did it, they chose 4 swing states, and they made it just close enough that it seemed reasonable. Because if you go back and look at the numbers were down to about 64% of Christians that actually got involved. Now, I've used this statement before with people, but if you if you're going to wait for that perfect candidate to come along that has all your values, you're not going to be voting at all ever in any election, because there's always something we can find wrong with candidates. And when enough Christians sit out a vote and they don't get involved, you get Seattle, you get Chicago, you get Los Angeles, you get Oregon, you get California. You allow wicked people to take over because you chose not to get involved. And now you have to live with the consequences, where a small minority holds all, like in Oregon. I said Seattle, I meant Washington, or you can think of like Portland, right? In one major urban area controls everybody, the lives of everybody in that entire state, where the majority of the state doesn't share their values, but they still have to live under that. and that allows all sorts of evils to come up and to happen. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Washington, Oregon, and Colorado now have all legalized hard drugs I want to say Oregon or Washington now. I think heroin is legal, and I know mushrooms in Colorado are legal. But hey, I recognize that my candidates are not going to they're not going to be near where I am in terms of my faith and my beliefs. Which one of those most closely aligns with mine? You know, Allison says both of them. Yeah, look at California. Thank you, Anita. They just passed a law to take away parents' rights. It's because Christians don't get involved. They just sit on their hands, or they sit on their fence, or for any number of reasons, don't want to do it. And so you live with the state that you allow these people to take over. So yeah, Sarah, drugs have completely changed the Pacific Northwest. I would just encourage people here to vote. I don't care if you have to hold your nose and vote for Trump, but it needs to be so overwhelming that even if they cheat, it doesn't matter. And honestly, again, I'm not saying Trump is going to fix America. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying he's the pastor in chief. I'm not saying, because I know I'm going to hear this over and over and over in the comments, because people won't watch the video, or they'll miss some part of it. They'll watch a small snippet of it, and then they won't hear anything else. But he is not our pastor in chief. It's not politics, it's policy. Whose policies do you want to live under for the next 4 years? If we're here, if the Lord tarries and we're here for 4 years, whose policies do you want to live under? Simple as that. Think back to 2020. Think about where you lived, what state you lived in, who ran that state. If it's a Democrat, I guarantee you it was probably miserable. If you were in a place that was run by Republicans, Texas, Oklahoma, um, Florida, it wasn't as bad. It wasn't so bad. So I met a lady at Titus was at Ninja, and the parents were all sitting there in these tables watching our kids do all this training and stuff. And we just started talking, and she has like 5 or 6 kids. So I thought, well, I think she probably had more, but there was 4 or 5 with her there. And I'm thinking, okay, she's probably either Mormon or Catholic is my guess. And so we are just making small talk. And so she turns out she's Mormon. And she said she was from Montana. I was like, well, how'd you end up here? In Texas? Well, they had lived in Montana, and then they had moved to California for a number of years. And she goes, people just lost their minds. They lost their ever loving minds during COVID. And she said they had left. They'd gone on a trip um, to go somewhere, but they had come through Texas on their way, and they noticed that nobody was wearing masks. Everybody seems to be generally happy, going about their normal life. And she was like, "How how are y'all doing this? Don't you know that there's a pandemic going on?" And people were like, "Yeah, I know. We're not doing that." And next thing you know, they're like, We're moving out of California," and they moved to Texas. So, and I've got a neighborhood of people behind us. I would say probably 40% of them are from out of state. They moved here from other states because it became so draconian and so tyrannical where they live. They just couldn't take it anymore. You couldn't raise your kids in that kind of environment. So I don't know. Here's all I'm going to say about this section, and then we'll move on. Don't call me or email me or tell me that you refuse to vote for Trump because he supports abortion. because the Democrats support abortion too, and everything else on top of that: fentanyl, open borders, crime, murders, etc. I mean, you're getting the worst of the worst with the other side. And if you feel that strongly, don't reach out to me unless you also tell me that you're not paying taxes anymore. You refuse to pay your taxes, and then I'll know you're serious. That's Let me just end it on that because uh, put your money where your mouth is, I guess. Okay. Um, that's my thing on votes. And let me tell you the last thing on this because I want to quote some more scripture here. We live in the system of government that we live in is a constitutional republic. We are the exception to the norm. And when they talk about American exceptionalism, it's not we're not saying that Americans are better than anybody else. We're not saying that America is better than anybody else. We're saying that the form of government that we chose to live under and create and live under is exceptional, is an exception to the rest of human history. The rest of human history overwhelmingly has been by kings and queens or despots, tyrants, dictators, um, oligarchs. Most of human history, that's how everybody lived under. That's the systems that they lived under. Our founding fathers had decided to take the best of multiple different um, political systems, put them together, and then as the backbone or the back support for all of this was the Judeo uh, Christian ethos, morality, and then that has allowed our nation to flourish and to live in the system that we live under. We are the exception to the norm in terms of the rest of the world and how the governments have come about throughout the last 6,000 years. And as citizens of this country, if you're in America, I mean, if you're in another country, ignore what I'm saying right here. But as citizens, you have rights, but you also have duties as a citizen. And part of those duties include paying your taxes, signing up for the military at a right age if you're a male, being part of your community, helping your community out, being a member of your community and not just withdrawing and segregating yourself into some little section of the woods and never interacting with anybody again. You can do that, but I mean, the intent for the citizen was to be involved in governing at the at the local and state and federal level. You have rights, and those rights are afforded to us in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. But there's also an expected or implied duties that include being involved in the political process. That was the mindset of the founders. And when you say I'm not going to vote because Trump is bad and the Democrats are bad, I don't really see any difference in that than I would see if you decided to sell everything you own and move off to a hill and just wait for the Lord to return. Hey, I want the Lord to come back today. I'm not a fan of how everything is going in the world right now, but I also recognize I was put here for this time, this place to be salt and light in this increasingly dark community. And I say community, I mean like global community, the world. We're supposed to be engaging people and showing them the love of Christ and demonstrating that with a life. And you can't do that if all you're doing is sitting on your hands complaining. And if you're confined to your home because of health or age or whatever, man, be praying. I gave this out earlier about like what can you do if you don't want to vote for Trump? If you just are not in good conscience not vote for Trump, find a candidate that you like that represents your values, even if they're not your representative or political figure, whoever. Just send them a note, say, "Hey, I'm praying for you." Encourage them, donate to their camp, whatever it is. Find some way to support people that you do like, because then that is a you're still being involved and you're still being in you're still being salt and light in terms of reinforcing that candidate's belief systems that are closely aligned with yours, right? You don't have to vote, but just there's an old saying. I don't know which culture it came from, but it said that no single drop of rain ever thinks it's responsible for the flood. And so recognize that we're each a drop, right, of rain. And when enough of us say we're not going to participate, it allows for the wicked people to take over. And then we all suffer under that leadership. Now, here was Paul when dealing with the folks in Jerusalem when they rose up against him and basically called the Romans on him. And it says, when the centurion heard that, he went and told the commander, saying, "Take care what you do, for this man is a Roman." When the commander came and said to him, Tell me, are you Roman?" And Paul said, "Yes." And the commander said, with a large sum, I obtained the citizenship. But Paul said, "I was born a citizen." And then immediately those who were about to examine him withdrew from him, and the commander was also afraid that he found out that he was a Roman, that and because he had bound him. Look, citizenship has a great deal of rights, but it also has responsibilities. We have responsibilities as citizens to be involved in our communities to try and make them better, recognizing fully that we are not going to change the overall trajectory of the world. But had our parents and grandparents in the greatest generation been more proactive in preserving the Christian nature of our nation in terms of just the Judeo-Christian values and morality, etc., we would not be in the same place we're in today. But they checked out, said, "Well, we can't get involved because that's separation of church and state," which is not really true in that sense of the word. And now it's been 70 years, and it's created this vacuum which has allowed all these other things to flood in and poison the minds of millions of people. So I'm a little passionate about this because I served in the military for 22 years, and I don't need people to come up and say thank you for your service. I want them to say, when they say, "Are you registered to vote? Are you doing your part? You're paying your taxes because you have to, because if you don't, you're going to be in a world of hurt." But don't tell me thank you for your service, but then check out and you're not involved in anything else. You're not appreciating the service that I did, or the service of millions of other men and women that have served in the armed forces going back to the Revolutionary War, who've lived and died and lost limbs and family members and suffered all manner of ill, that sacrificed so much so that we could have the ability to vote. And if you take anything away from what I'm saying today, because Christians have decided that in the 1940s and 1950s that this particular candidate didn't exactly share their same values and decided not to vote, and as they pulled back out of the political system, other things came in, and it's made it that much harder now 70 years later. I mean, we're lucky to get a guy like Trump. If that's the worst that he is, trust me, it could be far worse. It could be far worse. And we know we're at the end. We know we're here at the last moments of the last days, but we just don't know how much longer that's going to be. And I fear greatly that if for whatever reason Trump doesn't make it into office this last time, then we're done. We are going to become a third-rate banana republic, uh, uh, despotic regime that is going to be increasingly and aggressively hostile to Christians, hostile to life, hostile to Israel, hostile to families, hostile to children. I mean, it's going to be bad, and it's going to be chaotic, and it's going to be bloody, and it's going to be violent. And we're at that point now, at the tipping point of this nation, to where we cannot afford to sit on our hands. We have to get involved. We have to. um, make our vote count and be so overwhelmed, even when the left cheats, and we know they will, that it doesn't matter. Look, you may not like JD Vance. I didn't even really know him until just recently. And again, I'm not voting for him to be my pastor. I'm not on the pastor committee looking to find my new uh, spiritual leader for our congregation. He's simply running the political aspects of this country, and which one of these two parties is going to afford more freedom for the general population. I mean, that's a easy vote. So, okay, I'm going to go to question and answer time. Let's see. Thank you, Sarah, for collecting all these, and thank you, mods, for all that you do. Pamela Minnick, question: how do you know if you're going through a spiritual attack or if it's not a spiritual attack? Well, I think if you are trying to do something that God's put in your heart to do, and the minute that you do that, the world starts to fall apart around you in every kind of conceivable way. I view that very much as a spiritual attack because the enemy is trying to prevent you from doing something. If you are not a threat to the enemy, i.e., you're not living any kind of life that isn't even remotely Christian, you're not sharing the gospel, you're not doing any of that stuff. You're no threat to Satan. He's going to keep you fat, dumb, and happy and complacent and apathetic and living whatever that life you were living. Like I was. I was living that life before 2007. So I feel like if you are doing something for the kingdom, God's called you to do something, and you start to feel that position in the form of things just starting to go bad. I feel like that's very much the spiritual attacks that Satan is trying to discourage you from doing something, and they will increasingly get worse and worse the more you press forward. And that I feel like that's how you can know the difference. Um, Penny Erlob, what if there's no good choice? I mean, there there's no perfect choice, but there's still a good choice. Which one do you view? Which system do you want to live under? I mean, even if you set aside abortion as an issue, as a topic, think about all the thousands, the tens of thousands of people that are dying from fentanyl. Young people at the start of their lives are dying, and they're doing that because the border is wide open, and they're doing that because China is funding and fronting these cartels with all of these drugs, and through the open borders, they're able to pour across, and it's increasingly becoming accessible to everybody. Um, and if you can stop the flow of tons and tons and tons of fentanyl from coming across the border, and that crisis begins to die down, then you can focus other your attention and your energies and on getting your congressmen and your representatives to focus on abortion. I mean, if you're they say if you're in a hole, how do you get out of a hole? Well, the first thing you do is you got to stop digging, right? And I feel like if you keep voting left or you don't vote at all, you're digging. But as soon as you stop digging, you have to triage the crises in your community, in your life, right then and there. So which one is the one that your politicians are going to spend the most amount of time focusing on? If fentanyl is this massive crisis in the community you live in, and you've got young people dying left and right, and you've got gang wars going on, and it's just chaos. The last thing your elected officials are going to be worrying about is your pro-life position. They've got a million other things that are far more pressing in their mind than abortion. But if abortion or if the open border gets sealed and the drugs begin to slow down and things begin to calm down, and that's when you begin to focus your energies on getting them to push, and you're putting pressure on them to do what you voted for them to do. which is to push your pro-life agendas and missions. But I can tell you, when you're in a leadership position, you're not going you're going to look at whatever is the most pressing crisis you have to deal with, and that's going to be your number one focus. And right now, that focus is the open border. It is the flood of fentanyls, the flood of illegal immigration that's coming in. I mean, these things are seriously disrupting everything. So it's a matter of, I think, triaging your priorities. And when you recognize that when you get one thing down and that becomes one less thing on their plate, then you can be really pressing them on promoting pro-life legislation and becoming the squeaky wheel. And you need to get your churches involved, because these churches and most churches around the nation are still blindly living under this delusion that there's this separation of church and state. There's not. The only separation is that the state cannot create a state-run church and cannot mandate a church, a state religion, they can't force people to go to church, but there's no prohibition of there's no infringement of the rights thereof as well. Now, if you can talk to your church leadership and say, okay, look, I think we as a church, let's say your church is 300 people, you say, we need to send a message to Congressman so and so or Representative so and so, say we are adamantly pro-life. We know that we recognize that the open border is the biggest pressing issue right now, or fentanyl, or street crime, or whatever it is that's the most pressing issue for that politician. But we want you to know that we're also very passionate about this thing. We want pro-life. We want the abortion clinic shut down, or the morning after drugs banned from this. And now it's up to the states. So now the states can make that decision, and states are making that decision. In some ways good, in some ways bad. But you have to become an activist every bit as much as the left is. What the left does very, very well is they've learned how to organize, community organizer, right? In protest, you're loud, you're in their face, not in their face, but this is what they do. They get in their face. They become a problem for whatever political leader is opposing their agenda. We don't have to be that aggressive and in your face about it, but they need to know that we represent a large voting bloc, in that they are not doing what we ask them to do. That means they're not going to be in office very long if they keep ignoring us. And so you can be forceful, and you can be present your position in a very polite way, yet recognizing that ignoring you is going to be to their peril, politically speaking. Just Vicky. We all need. Hey, baby, what's up? How are you?
Good. So nails her.
Did you get your nails done?
No.
Oh, is that clothes? All right.
No, look at her office.
Or what? Are you home for the rest of the day? Okay.
I think she has to go with Jocelyn to go get I was getting her nails done, and then Mama's getting her toes done.
There's Coco. Hi, Coco.
Already.
Hey, shut the door, babe. All right, take the dogs with you. Family time, yes. Just Vicky. We all need to go back and get educated on our history. How about some guests such as William Federer? Absolutely. I would love to have William Federer on. In fact, I will reach out and see if I don't know him personally, so I need to see if I can make that happen. But I very much agree with his sentiment, in that God chose us to live in this time right now. And it's not simply just to disengage from everything and say we wash our hands of this time. We're just waiting for the Lord to come back. That reminds me of the parable of the talents, where the one servant took his talent and basically went and hid it. And when the master came back, he just gave him back the talent they had. we're not called to do that. We're called to engage and be out there and being a force for good in this world until he comes back. And it becomes increasingly problematic when the wicked are in power. Um, Question: what sort of currency do you think will be used in the millennial kingdom? Man, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I don't think it would be gold since streets are going to be made out of gold and all that in the New Jerusalem and stuff. So it may be not even worthy of currency at that point. Maybe it's just all bartering systems at that point. You know, my guess would be bartering. You know, I have cows. You need milk. You have chickens. I need eggs. Boom. But it says also that and I can't remember the exact passage where everybody will be under their own vine and they'll have their own wine. Like you won't need to buy and sell necessarily. Somebody has that passage off the top of their head. We fly soon. Question P: don't you believe that no matter who we vote for, God is going to put in place who He wants in place, regardless of our vote? Well, Acts 17:26. Obviously, God establishes the times, the boundaries of nations, and how long they last. He appoints the kings and the rulers. I think Nebuchadnezzar also pointed that out. So yes, ultimately, God is the final arbiter of the trajectory of the nations that or the nations and the flow of nations. But I also see us like moving down this river of time. Time is this river, and we're on a boat, and Satan is on a boat, and the demons are on a boat, and we can only maneuver within the banks of these rivers, left or right. And God already knows what we'll do, but um, we're still moving, regardless of who's in power or whatever. We're still moving in the general direction towards where God said we're going to be. So we do exercise a good deal. We still have our free will in this. Free will is still in play, and it's not. Um, our free will and the decisions that we make is not unknown to God. He already knows how this is going to play out, but we still have the ability to exercise that free will. But I think let's say that let's say that Christians had not turned out to vote in 2016 and Hillary Clinton had won, and we're still here because the rapture is not supposed to happen until say 2028, and we would have just added 4 more years of tyranny and despotism to our remaining time on earth, at least in the United States. But I think that would have had a ripple effect across the world. It would have destabilized the world in other ways, like China invading Taiwan, um, Russia moving not just into Ukraine but into Poland and other places. I think that there are far greater ramifications than just our voting system. And chances are we would have not seen a another honest honestly elected politician ever, after that. It would have went from, it would have went for 8 years for Clinton, and she would have rigged the system that it would be impossible to run against her. And then that would have been 2024 right now, and she would have had somebody lined up behind her. And that's even if we were going to have elections still. So I think the fact that Christians can be outraged and not protest but vote, use their voting power to bring in somebody that will slow down this race towards um, wickedness. Um, I feel like it was a little reprieve, if you will. So do we have another reprieve? Well, we don't. Yeah, I mean, we don't know when the Lord's coming back. So for me, that's an easy decision. I don't want to live under a Harris system, because I know far more people are going to die and far more chaos is going to be brought upon the world. But also, God is the ultimate. God is going to make the decision and put in place whoever he wants to. And I feel like with a guy like Trump, um, I recognized this back in 2016 that no matter what they threw at him, it didn't phase him, and he still survived all those things. He survived 9 years of the most intense persecution I've ever seen any political leader ever undergo. And to cap it all off, they try to kill him, and just by divine providence, he turns his head at the right second, and it takes a piece of his ear off rather than his head. So, man, I don't know. I got to think that God's has a plan for Trump. And again, I'm not saying that he is the Messiah in chief. I'm not saying any of that stuff. I just I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, man, that this guy's got preternatural resilience when it comes to taking in these just nonstop attacks left and right all the time and still keep moving forward, you know. And I'm not saying that he's a godly man, but I mean, I look at him and I look at his children. I'm not saying they're godly either. I'm just saying that they have great love and respect for him and admiration as a father. So at least at the very minimum, he's a good father. And in that sense of recognizing and appreciating family, at the very least, he's pro family. And so I have a family, and I want somebody that their kids are relatively normal rather than Kamala Harris's stepdaughter or the Clintons' kids or Barack's kids and all that. Like, I can see if their kids turn out like that and they don't care about their own kids, they sure as heck don't care about my kids. And they are going to do whatever they want to do, what, irregardless of whether that destroys my family or not. Um, KG say by faith and grace. Question, Elise, you said scripture, um, God puts people in leadership, but then you said one vote on one side cancels the other out. Do you believe God's got it or not? Biblically, they prayed, vote is new. Um, this kind of goes back to the whole free will versus predestination argument that have separated Christians for hundreds and hundreds of years between um, Calvinism and Arminianism. And I feel like I think there's a delicate balance between these two. And there's a quote from Ironside, Harry Ironside. I'm going to pull up real fast. Let me see if I can find it. If I can't find it, then I'll just. Oh, here it is. It's called The Door. So Harry Ironside was one of those early 20th century dispensational leaders. He says, it's been pictured this way. Here is a vast host of people hurrying down the broad road with their minds fixed upon their sins, and one stands calling attention to yonder door, the entrance into the narrow way that leads to life eternal. On it is plainly depicted the text, whosoever will, let him come. Every man is invited, no one need hesitate. Some may say, well, I may not be of the elect, so it would be useless for me to endeavor to come, and the door will not open for me. But God's invitation is absolutely sincere. It is addressed to every man, whosoever will, let him take of the water of life freely. If men refuse to come, if they pursue their own godless way down to the pit, whom can they blame but themselves for their eternal judgment? But the messenger addressed himself to all, the call came to all, the door could be entered by all, but many refused to come and perished in their sins. Such men never blame God for their eternal destruction, and yet the door was open and the invitation was given, yet they refused. He says to them sorrowfully, Ye will not come unto me that ye may have life. But some will say, I am going inside, and I will accept the invitation. I will enter that door. And as he presses his way in, so the person that decides to come in, the free will, they decide to come in, and then the door shuts behind him. As he turns about, he finds written on the inside of the door the words, chosen in Christ before the foundation of the world. There is free will at play here, and there is also divine providence at play here. I'm not God. I can't say it's 51% of this and 49% of the other. I don't know. I don't know that. I know that they're both true. And so I'm not if you and I do our duty and everybody goes out and votes and somehow the Democrats still swing a victory because they're able to rig the voting systems or the midnight ballot dupes or whatever happens, and we still get Kamala Harris or Barack Obama or whoever they put into place, at the very minimum, you can at least say, I did my duty as a citizen and they broke the law. At least you don't have that on your conscience, but you can't not vote and then sit there and complain about it if you didn't help, try to help. So if you're not going to get involved, don't complain. Simple as that. I mean, I told that as a commander, I've told that to my soldiers. As a father, I've told that to my kids. As a friend, I've said that to other friends. Hey, if you're not going to help out, I don't want to hear your complaints. We're not guaranteed the results. We're just guaranteed, or we're supposed to be doing the right thing. And as citizens of this country, we're supposed to be voting, right? That's how we're supposed to, that's how our system functions. So yes, it's both. It's free will and it's divine providence. And how much of each, I don't know. I just know that they're both true. Let's see. Diane, question. We live in a republic. The people rule. We vote for politicians to serve the people. I would rather politicians serve moral people than immoral. Do you think we have forgotten this? Yes, I do. And I think it goes back to this divorce we had back in 1947, where we divorced the church from the public arena of ideas. And churches, for whatever reason, went along with this. I don't know. I can't put myself in the mindset back of the 1940s, but the fact that they weren't up in arms about this back then and didn't protest then to the point to where they walked back or at least clarified this separation of church and state phrase. And I don't know. Lori, question. Do you think Trump meant when he was calling on the Christians to vote recently and said, if you vote for me, you won't have to worry in 4 years, you'll never have to vote again? No, I think that's his quote is taken out of context because I listened to that. He was saying that, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's not the way that it was framed after that. That was taken out of context. Go back and listen to what he said originally. Um, I think what he's saying, you don't have to worry about the vote. He'll fix the system, the corruption that's in the system now, because if you don't vote now, you're not going to get to vote again. Bless you. Bless you. Beverly Young, question, Pete, what do you think about Tyler 2434 theory of the new wine time of 9th of Av, I think, in August, that the rapture could happen. And I don't think the rapture is tied to any Jewish feast or the feast of the Lord, but like Tyler and I've always viewed the 9th of Av as being, if the rapture happened on that day, it would have a significant impact to the psyche of the Jewish people in Israel. That would be They would be cognizant of that. They would make the association, like, bad things happen on the 9th of Av, and these are like divinely divinely providential things, um, and that the church is now removed on the 9th of Av. I would, if I were Jewish and I had a decent understanding of my my faith system, I would maybe look at that as a correlation, and I think that would have the biggest impact. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all the new wine stuff. I'm not publicly disputing that with Tyler. He's more than welcome to believe that. I'm not all on board with it, in terms of, I don't know if I see it that way necessarily. 9th of Av seems like an opportune time with the biggest impact for the Jewish people if the rapture happened then, but I don't draw any rapture correlations with new. No offense, Tyler, if he's on here. That's just not something I see. But to be fair, look, there are things I disagree with Lee Brainerd on, and there's things I disagree with JB Hickson on. There's things I disagree with Tyler on. There's things. I mean, these aren't major issues necessarily. These are just more nuanced things that I just don't see it that way. But I believe things that they don't agree with. So we all have these things that we hold to that not everybody across even our community, as small as it is, agrees on together. But we'll see. Wait and see. Beverly again. Question, Pete, did you hear Pastor Amir Sarfati and Pastor Jack Hibbs say on the same day that the war of Gog and Magog is happening any day? I think no, I didn't, but I have been following the news with Turkey threatening Israel. You obviously got Iran ready to strike Israel, and you've got all the forces of Hezbollah and the whatever's left of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and the other groups in the Judea and Samaria areas up in arms, as well the Houthis, and it very well could happen that way. It would be interesting because I always believe that the rapture happened prior to Gog and Magog, simply because of the wording in the chapter and the way it's written in Ezekiel. It seems like God's focus is now back on the nation of Israel, but we'll see. Mr. Cheddar Pepper Prepper. God does things on the appointed times on the 9th of Av, which is going to be August 13th. Lots of things happen, especially in Israel. What may come? Economic crash, World War III, rapture? I agree. 9th of Av has always been significant to the nation of Israel. And Tyler and I did a video on the 9th of Av a couple of years ago, I think. So I think that's for me. Again, it's interesting. I don't hold to like the rapture having to happen on the Feast of Trumpets or Pentecost or Hanukkah or any other time. But the 9th of Av is significant to me because it would be a wake-up call to the nation of Israel, I think. My 2 cents. Okay. Gwen Stone, question, what do you think of Christians saying that some teachers are becoming new apostolic reformation because they're saying that you need to vote? Yeah, so when Lee and I did that the left and the right both hate the pre-trib rapture, I feel like it's Pete, you haven't answered Gid breakfast question yet. I don't know if you can repost that question, Gid breakfast. I haven't seen it. Mom, good breakfast. You haven't seen that question. Yeah, just repost it on there so I can see what it is. Yeah, the New Apostolic Reformation, basically, the people that hold to a mid-trib, pre-wrath, post-trib, um, New Apostolic Reformation, the post-millennial preterist, basically everybody that's not pre-trib, hates, I don't want to say hates, strong word, greatly dislikes the pre-trib position because they see that we are not engaged in the fight for the nation. And so the left hates us because obviously because of our moral stance is a biblical stance, and that directly opposes most of the lifestyles and things that they approve of, as well as our support for Israel, which they hate. Um, but the right hates us because they see us as kind of like sold all of our stuff. We've put on these white robes and we've went it and we're just waiting. We're not engaged in this society at all. Eric Metaxas, remember when he came out with that guy and they basically were just bashing the pre-trib folks because we're good for nothing. And I made the case then, and I'll make it again. Like, I didn't even get actively involved in anything until I had a proper understanding of Bible prophecy and realizing, hey, time is short. We have the time that we have to work in this world is quickly drawing to a close. And I got involved in starting Bible studies. I got involved with my school board for 2 years, and in fact, it'll start again this year. I'm still involved with the school board. Um, I had my jail ministry before I left a year ago, and I haven't restarted it yet simply because of that we had an election, a new sheriff's in, and trying to get back into the jail system is not as easy as you would think. But my friend was there before. My friend was a sheriff, so it made it a lot easier for him to grease the wheels for me to get in and out of the prison once a week. The prison warden is not a big fan of my Bible studies because he just sees that as one more thing he's got to deal with. And not that he hates me or hates Christianity or anything like that. It's just one more thing that he doesn't need to deal with. So he slow walks all that stuff. So I needed a friend at the sheriff's office to kind of make him open the doors for me. So now I have to kind of restart that whole process again. Um, Bruce says, it's difficult for someone like me to understand how you can tell everyone that time is short in a video, but then not live as if time is really that short. Dude, we are to occupy until he comes. Again, I'm not selling everything I own and moving out to a hill in a white robe and just waiting, sitting on my hands and waiting. I'm actively engaged. Actively engaged. And I encourage all of everybody here today to be actively engaged in whatever community you live in, because we don't know. No man knows the day or the hour, right? We can know the season, and we can know we're in the season. We can know that the season is coming to an end, but we're not going to know exactly when that's going to be. So I'm not trying to compare my works with anybody else's works, but I'm not just sitting around waiting for the Lord to come back. I'm living and I'm occupying until He comes. I would think that if somebody thinks that prophecy doesn't exist, or that it's all been done and we're just there's nothing left to happen except somewhere down the road 1,000 years from now the Lord decides to come back, how do you make sense of all of this, what we're seeing? There's no hope in that. And in fact, I would look at preterism, whether full or partial. To me, it's like atheism. It offers nothing and takes everything. There's no hope in preterism. There's no hope in amillennialism. If this is your kingdom right now, good grief, man. We have been grossly oversold in scripture of what the kingdom is. This is not the kingdom. This is not what God intended. We are meant for greater things than this, not because we deserve greater things, but because God is greater. And it's like that C.S. Lewis quote that right now, here now, Christians will settle for playing in a puddle, a muddy puddle, and there's a wall right here, and there's the beach on the other side, a gorgeous beach, white sand and clear waters, but we're stuck here playing in this puddle because we don't want to walk around the wall to see that there's a beach over there. And I feel like that's amillennialism. It offers nothing and takes everything. Here's the kingdom. You're in it right now. Oh, it's not a real kingdom. It's a mystery kingdom. But yeah, there's still crime. There's still um, child rape and murder, and there's death and destruction and wars and all that. But you're still the kingdom. That is really that's really having a minimalist view of Scripture and the power of God. Yeah, and there's amazing work right now that God's doing in each of our lives. But that doesn't mean the other stuff is just written off altogether. There's too many promises in Scripture that say otherwise. And God is not a man that he should lie, right? Be Rich, question: why do pastors tell us it's wrong to vote for the lesser of two evils, both being evil? I'm saying it's your duty as a citizen to vote. If you're a citizen of this country, then it's part of your duty as a citizen, just like it is to register for the Selected Service as an 18-year-old male, just as it is to pay your taxes, just as it is to do everything else it's required of being as part of our citizenship. That's the country we live in. If we lived in a country where there was no voting, under some kind of monarchy or some kind of uh, dictatorship, whatnot, then you wouldn't have that problem. You don't have to worry about that. You just live under the rules that you live under. But we live in a constitutional republic, and it's part of our duties as citizens to exercise our rights and duties as citizens. So let's see. Okay, Mom, hold on. Yeah, Bruce Peters is a preterist. This is a guy that we're going to debate here in a few weeks. So don't block him or remove his comments or anything like that. Just you guys got to know that's where he's coming from. And he's a brother in Christ. We just have vastly different views on how we see things. I don't see this question, Mom. Good breakfast question. Do you think the enemies of Israel is in a rush to cause problems before the U.S. election? Hey, you know what, Mom? Or good breakfast. To your question, if I were China or Russia right now, Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin or any other number of bad actors in the world, and I'm looking at the chaos that's in the United States right now, I would think that they are going to try and make their move before. Um, Bruce says, "I am not a purist." I answered that in your question in your video. In the video, my response to you, when you say that all things are fulfilled in Christ, or Christ has fulfilled all things, what you're stating is you're either a partial preterist or you're a full preterist. Because if all that's left to happen is the second coming, that's what part of partial preterism believes. So, but the other point, if the bad actors in the world are looking at the United States right now and the level of chaos, I mean, if I were them, this would be the opportune time to do that. Nicolette Warabets, I have a question. So for children whose parents allow them to switch gender, do they go to heaven? I know a little boy whose mom full on supported him. So I have a little different view um, than say maybe other teachers and stuff. But because the Bible doesn't give a specific age, the age of accountability, at least in the New Testament, um, that area has been kind of a gray area, right, for most people. Now, the position I hold to is that the only place in the Bible that we do see ages associated with children being accountable or not accountable is in Exodus and Leviticus. And mind you, this is at the time where lifespans are pretty much stabilized to where we are today. So this isn't in the pre-flood days where people live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. This is where lifespans are no more than 120 years. We know that Moses lived for 120, and I think Aaron lived to 121 or 122 or something. But for the most part, most of the average people would only live to 70 to 80 years. So at that time, when you had to pay the ransom tax, those under the age of 20 didn't pay it. and this was to atone for their sins. And then on the other side of it, all the census where they said, oh, we need the census of all the males so they can know who of all the tribes who can go to war. It was, you didn't take the census for those under the age of 20. And at the same time, conversely, those who could go into the promised land because of the spies that went over, yet Caleb and Joshua came back with the good reports, and the other 10 that had the bad reports, and they got everybody all worked up and afraid of the giants that were there in the land. The only people that could go into the kingdom were those that were under the age of 20. So when we think about the way that we're built, right, the way that God designed us, you're not born as a baby with a fully functional brain that can, you're not having conversations as a baby talking about, calculus and philosophical points and everything else. You're limited to gaga and goo goo, and you're basically drooling on yourself and pooping in your pants until you get to this is process. You're a baby, right? It takes the human brain right till about the age of 20, somewhere between 20 and 25, for it to be the prefrontal cortex, that is, to be kind of fully functional in that regard, which is why we limit the age of voting to 18. We limit the age of driving to 16. We You make the legal drinking age 21. It all hinges right around that time. And in fact, we have a legal system that differentiates between those who are under the age of 18 and those who are over the age of 18. So if a child commits a murder at the age of 16, their repercussions would be different than that if they did it as an 18-year-old. So if we as humans, fallen, sinful, etc., can recognize there is a physiological difference in a now the age 18 may be arbitrary, but we can recognize the difference between an adult and a child. Surely God, who is perfect and all of his attributes are perfect, recognizes there is a distinction between those who have a fully functioning brain and those who don't have a fully functioning brain. So I've looked at the age of accountability upwards to the age of 20. I'm not saying that is writ law, the black and white rule. That's just how I see it, because the only place in the Bible we do see there being a distinction between those under the age of 20 and those over the age of 20 is with regard to the nation of Israel. And I know a lot of people will say, well, what about 13-year-olds, because that's the age of the bar mitzvah, or the bat mitzvah for the girls. Well, that policy did not become a thing until like the 13th century. So that's not anything in the Bible. It may stem back there. It's just not included in the Bible. It's not written in the Bible. But culturally speaking, that did not become a thing until the bar mitzvah didn't become a thing until about the 13th century. So my point with that is that I think, should the Lord come back tomorrow, that everybody under this age of accountability will be taken up, whether their parents are believers or not, because I think God is long suffering and that he desires that he should lose none, or that none should perish. And if we hold true to our belief system, then how could a child, let's say a child is 7 years old, the rapture happens tomorrow and he's stuck here and his parents are gone. And then the mark of the beast system comes about, and by the time he's 9 or maybe 10, he's still under the age. And he takes the mark, not fully understanding what's going to happen, because he can't even comprehend. I mean, think about a child. Think about yourself. Think about the way you were when you were 16. We all, I think about myself. I thought I knew everything, but in reality, there was so much I didn't know. I was an idiot. And so are you at that age. Idiots, because we're just to that age where we think we can be independent, but we really don't know what we're doing, right? And we're barely getting the physical skills down to the hand and eye coordination and all that stuff that goes in with the finer motor skills that we have, and at the same time, you're going through puberty, your body's changing, your hormones are all over the place. So I don't know. I think God could have made us to where at the age of 2, we would be fully accountable for our actions. He could have made us and designed us that way, but he didn't. He allowed us to be born in the manner that we are, and then to go through the stages of maturity through life. And that's how he set it up. That's not anything I have control over. That's how God established the order for mankind to evolve from a child to adulthood. So I think, given the fact that God made it so that our prefrontal cortex, which handles all of the primary decision making, which is based on our education, our experience, our um, culture, all of those things start to come into play into our mind, and we begin to form a worldview. And it's around 20 years old when that becomes more solidified. And I think it's interesting that the Israelites, even in Moses' time, recognized the distinction between those under the age of 20 and those over the age of 21, or over the age of 20. And for the ransom tax, or let me say, just for those that could enter into the promised land, to Canaan, there wasn't any distinction made for those kids, let's say, that were 17 when Joshua came back or when the spies came back with the bad report. There's no distinction made about whether or not they believed it or not. It just says there's a cutoff. This was a cutoff, not what they believed, but it was this age. So I don't see that reiterated in the New Testament, although we do see in Romans 7 where Paul makes the statement that he was alive once, and then he came to understand the law and he died. So somewhere in that process of being a younger man, as he came to understand the law, he died spiritually. He didn't die physically, and he didn't die, his soul didn't die, his mental state didn't die, he didn't go into a coma. The spirit inside him that God shaped whole inside him dried up and died, because he came to understand his sinfulness in front of a holy and righteous God. And that says, question, Pete, do you recommend we go back to a godly marriage between church and state pre-1940s? I feel like we're so far gone at this point as a society. I mean, our country has fully embraced postmodernism for the better part of 100 years. Not all of our society, or not all of our country, but the universities, the seminaries, then the media, the government, I mean, Hollywood, every form of entertainment is given over. And what is postmodernism? But in a way, it's almost equivalent to like just embracing paganism, because in both in both both of those views, there's no objective truth. Whatever you think is true is true. And like Charlie Kirk was fond of saying, the problem with paganism is that you have a lot of different gods, and with a lot of different gods, you have a lot of different moralities that are all at play at any given time. So I think that's where we're at now. I think we're Humpty Dumpty at this point. There's no way of putting us back together again. And we're so far, we were a homogenous society back in that time, and now we are so fractured under so many different areas. I don't see how we come back together. But okay, Jonathan Sinclair, how does the prayer to a demon at the RNC affect your thought process on this? It doesn't. Here's again, I go back to this idea that the way our political system is designed, we don't have to build coalitions in order to get a majority to control, say, parliament, like they do in the United Kingdom, or that they do in Israel. We have these two umbrella parties, and inside of these umbrellas are the coalitions already, and so they're incredibly broad because they're just two, and we've brought in so many different kinds of cultures and everything for the last 100 years, and we're a nation of immigrants to begin with, but I mean it's been on overdrive since, and most of the immigrants that we were getting early on were from other, European nations that were formerly Christian or were came from Western civilization, and now they're coming from everywhere. So I feel like which party is going to be open to the most amount of religious freedom per regards to Christianity, and it's not the Democrats, everybody except the Christians, whereas the Republicans will take everybody but will not exclude the Christians. So that's how I see it. Kathy, question, advice would be welcome if how to continue to pray for unsaved close family members when you've been doing it so long and nothing changes. Tired and sad. Look, prayer is powerful. Um, you can ask my mom here, how long did she pray for me? It took 15 years for me to pull my head out of my fourth point of contact. And it took a come to Jesus moment, that I've shared with you guys many times. Um, it really took 15 years at a minimum, maybe longer. But I would say don't give up praying for people. Don't give up praying for your lost loved ones. Um, I mean, my mom says try 30. uh, Thanks, mom. Well, I was 33 when I had my come to Jesus moment, so maybe you're right. But even still, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we just can't. You just can't stop. I mean, you've got to keep praying for people even after they get saved. Just because somebody gets saved doesn't mean that their problems automatically go away. They're probably gonna have more problems, and there's gonna be a greater desire for them to fall away and to go back to their old lifestyle. So, I may be the exception to the rule, but there are many people that are on fire for the Lord for a little bit of time, and then they go back to wherever they were. So, I think praying has just got to be part of our daily lives going forward until the Lord comes back. Period. Whenever that is. And let's see, good breakfast question. Do you have any? Okay, I answered that one. Thank you. Sarah got that one already. Karen Lewis. Question: is there going to be any electricity or technology in the millennium? You know, I've this is just me, but I kind of always thought the millennium would be kind of like the world in terms of technology with the Lord of the Rings kind of thing, where it's just, you know, fire and all the natural processes going on. I think nature will be back to its full strength, and it will be back to giving, not after Adam sinned, that God told him that the land would not yield its full strength anymore, and then again that was reiterated after Cain kills Abel. And how much more has it been reduced since then because of all the blood we've shed here since Abel? So I think the world will be back to its full strength in providing the maximum amount of comfort and pleasure to the people at that time. And so, for example, if you were thirsty, you could just reach into a river and get a cup and drink straight out of the river and not have to worry about germs, bugs, sickness, disease, whatever. I mean, it would just it's going to be perfected back to that state. So I don't know if there's technology. I tend to think it'll be more like magic, or the supernatural will become the natural at that point. I would be a little disappointed if we have to rely on any kind of technology. And for example, as a after the rapture, at the rapture, we're translated, if you're alive then, from mortal to immortal, from corruptible to incorruptible. And we see in 1 John 3, John is telling us that and I'm paraphrasing him here, he's like, we don't know exactly how it'll be, but we'll be like Christ was after his resurrection. And so what could Christ do after after the resurrection? He appeared in a locked room with his disciples, and then he sat down. So he was not constrained by physical matter, but he was able to manipulate and use physical matter at the same time. I think we'll be able to appear and disappear at our, not just to disappear, but like I'm sitting here talking to you, and then I'm thinking about, man, it would be nice to be on the beach in Tahiti right now, and I could just think about it, and I'm there. Boom. No, I don't have to worry about flying. I don't have to worry about airports or getting molested by the security guards, the security agents at the airports. I'm not having to stand in line and take my shoes off to go through a metal detector. I don't have to do any of that stuff. I can just think about where I want to be, and I can be there. And that's for the believer that's been put into their glorified form. You could also eat, but you don't need to eat. I mean, you can eat because you want to eat, because it's pleasurable, not because you're hungry. You can sleep if you want to sleep, but you're not sleeping because you're tired. You're sleeping because you want to, or you want to lay down and take a nap, or whatever. I think we're so short-sighted in terms of what I mean. It's going to impact every little thing that we ever do in this life. It's not going to be a problem in the next. Blessed Step says, Pete, you should read the book Brotherhood of Darkness by Dr. Stanley Monteith. You wouldn't want to vote again after reading it. The presidents are picked 50 years in advance. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Let me just clarify this, because I don't want my words to be taken out of context. I believe that there is a Luciferian elite at the upper echelons, whether you want to call them these families that run the world, et cetera, et cetera. I agree that they're there. And I agree that there's echelons of spiritual forces, dark spiritual forces at work at all the different levels. But when we begin to ascribe so much power and authority to the Luciferian elite, that I think that diminishes God's providence in all of this. And I'm sure many would say that that they're not trying to do that, but at the same time, they kind of are. Like, I can't, we have too much scripture of God putting people in charge, and he raises up kings and takes them down, sets the boundaries of nations and empires. Either God can do that, or the Luciferian elite are doing that. It can't be both. So, you know, I, I know they exist, and I know that they impact this world, and that they're trying to conspire together, as it says in Psalms 2, to throw off the shackles, to throw off God's control. But they can't. That's like a ant raising his fist up at me if about to step on him. He's shaking his fist at me like, I dare you, let's fight, and just step on the ant and move on. It's like that's about how anticlimactic it is to God. So no, I believe that there's evil, dark forces in the world, and I believe that they have very dark plans for the world. I don't think that they control voting 50 years out, or even 10 years out. I mean, look how much changes in the right now. Everything's changing by the week. Um, but they're entitled to their opinions. I'm entitled to mine. Let's see. Gloria, did my question not show up? What is casting lots? Is it gambling? Casting lots, at least in the Acts sense of the word, where they're trying to pick the replacement for Judas Iscariot, is not gambling per se. It's more leaving it up to God, or like divine providence, and letting God turn the dice over, or whatever it is, as opposed to playing for money. We see the casting lots in Jonah's case as well, before he's thrown overboard. a form of it, right, where they're trying to figure out who's causing all this terrible weather that just suddenly sprang up, and their boats, the storm is threatening to imperil their lives. And finally, Jonah's like, it's me, guys, it's me. I'm running from God. This is why this is happening. So they're not playing for money. They're not leaving it up to chance. I think they're thinking that doing this is God is able to influence the outcome and would provide for them that answer. So, but I think the 12th apostle was actually Paul, and Paul wasn't chosen till years later. And Paul was the last person I'm sure these the apostles ever thought would be um, the 12th, or the greatest of the apostles, as it were. So God's ways are not our ways, and we don't understand that. And you know what? Trump could lose this election, and Kamala Harris could be put in place. And then at that point, I have to say, well, this is something God has allowed. But at the very minimum, hey, I voted. I have a right to complain because I participated in the system. But people that don't vote shouldn't have a right to complain, in my opinion. So think of voting as your God-given right to voice your opinion after the fact, if nothing else, right? Annette, okay, I saw that. Pookie, thank you. Pete, in light of the 2024 elections or not, I haven't heard pastors speak of Kamala involved in communism through I haven't heard pastors speak of Kamala involved in communism through a commie Steve Phillips, who's behind her opinion in many China orgs. Do you know? I don't honestly know a lot about her other than that she was Willie Brown's arm candy for a number of years, and then she got appointed um, to some political offices from there, and that's kind of where she began to make her rise up through the state. But it was her connection to Willie Brown at the time. But I don't know who this other fellow is, Steve Phillips. Um, I wouldn't doubt it though. I mean, look how long California's been in the tank. It's been I don't even know the last time California voted Republican. I know they had Schwarzenegger as a governor, but he wasn't really a Republican. He was more of a rhino. Yeah. And so guys, I'm again, I'm not I'm not telling you to vote. I'm just saying that in my opinion, if you don't vote, don't complain. And we don't know how long we're going to be here. We know it's soon. We know we're in the season. We can look around us and see that this world is marching, goose stepping as fast as they can towards the world of Revelation 13. We're seeing the convergence at the geopolitical level, at the religious level, at the economic level, at the financial level. Technologically, we're seeing this. Everything is moving in that direction. Um, in fact, I'm going to link a Y-Files. I'll just post it as the top comment. Y-Files is not a Christian channel. In fact, they're skeptics. I would say they're probably the best thing to describe them as a skeptic. And some of it's done as humor because he's got a talking fish next to him, so it's not, don't take it that seriously. But they always talk about interesting things, right? And every once in a while, they'll get to something like they did here recently, and he was basically describing the world that Revelation 13 is going to look like, and he does it in a way that's pretty frightening. And Joe Rogan, and this other fella is talking about the the rise of central bank digital currencies, and then they read Revelation 13 after that, and they're like, dude, and Joe Rogan's not a Christian. He's mocked Christianity for a very long time, and even he is like, good grief, man, it looks exactly like Revelation 13. So all of these people are looking, not even Christians are looking at this going, global government, you've got global media, they're all saying the same thing. They want a one world currency, digital currency. So now it's a surveillance currency. You can't buy or sell without their say. And if you do, they're going to know every single thing you do, and they can cut you off at a moment's notice, because if you go outside of whatever boundaries they set for your, you decide to buy a gun, or you decide to support a candidate or donate to a particular church or whatever, they can just cut you off. And that money's programmable. So it's a programmable surveillance currency. Um, all the world systems together, everything is transnational today, whether you're Google, Coca-Cola, Disney, whatever, everything runs across the world. Nationalism, as much as I wish it could go forward, I don't, even if Trump does come into office, I think we're still getting the digital currency, because I think they're going to try and crash the current fiat dollar system. They are going to crash it. I mean, it's at 35 trillion right now. There's no way to really dig yourself out of that hole. So everything that we see is moving in that direction. It's trending in that direction, as Dr. Andy Woods would say. It's not trending away, it's trending toward that. So I think regardless of who's in office, I think that's what we're going to see. At the same time, even if it is another year or two, let's say it's 2 years into the Trump presidency that the rapture happens, I think there's still more freedom and autonomy for us to continue to share the gospel, and for places like YouTube to still allow for channels like this to exist. I think, should Harris get in, I think this channel would go away. I think most of the Christian channels would probably get banned or censored or shadow banned or whatever. So I think in the time being, which of these two offers the most amount of freedom for us to continue to serve day in and day out? I got to say it's got to be Trump's. But even if Trump gets in, these things are still going to be pressed forward, because Satan realizes his time is short, and he is going to keep driving this train to get the world as ready as it can be for his man of the hour to come, which is the Antichrist and the man of sin, the man of lawlessness, the rider on the white horse that we see in Revelation 6:1 and 2. This man is coming. He may already be alive. In fact, I'm pretty sure he is alive. We just don't know who he is yet. And we can't do anything to change the overarching trajectory of the world today. But in the time we have remaining, which of the two systems allows us to continue to be salt and light in the world? I, I, I gotta say, it's Trump's. And we've got all this stuff kicked off with Israel. You've got Turkey threatening to get involved. You've got Iran ready to get involved in a war. You've got Russia all in Ukraine, and pretty much done. I mean, Ukraine is pretty much done. And I know that there are still people left in Ukraine, but I think their military's done. And were it not for NATO, um, this conflict with Ukraine would have been over a year ago. But you've got the neocons pushing NATO to get a war going with Russia. You've got China licking their lips, ready to take Taiwan. And I mean, the world is on a knife's edge right now. And really, I think in a broad scheme of things, it's kind of like the Hegelian dialectic being played out, where we keep getting this inept and corrupted leadership over and over and over, not just in the United States, but everywhere, that people are groaning and crying out for somebody to come and fix the system. And I think that's who the Antichrist is going to be. And how does Trump play into that? Well, um, Trump is not like these other leaders. And when the rapture happens, and it will happen before the tribulation starts, it is going to collapse the United States. And as I said many times, if 10% of Americans get raptured, that's 30 something million that would be gone in an instant. That will collapse the system. Absolutely. because it's not just Christians at the lower echelons of society, it's Christians. We're in every social strata all the way up. And when you pull them out all of a sudden, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, that is going to be disastrous for the United States. And as the United States collapses, it is going to create a vacuum. And in that vacuum is what's going to allow for the 10 kings to rise up, and maybe they create some kind of like economic zones or regional um, uh, imperial regionalism, whatever you want to call it. They'll divide themselves up into 10 regions or 10 economic zones, and they will use that to form this global system that they're trying to put together so desperately. And, they've already told us, hey, we want this done by 2030. This is part of the Agenda 2030. This is part of the Great Reset. Everything they tell us they're going to do, they're not hiding it anymore. And I think that's where we're at right now. Okay, guys. Thank you for hanging out. Sorry I was a little bit late today. My other job kind of bled over into the time here. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate the questions. Thank you for the super chats. Bruce, thanks for coming in. I appreciate you being here. I look forward to our debate, and I'll email you as it gets a little closer. We'll look at those 3 days, 4 days, and see what time actually works out best. So, Mom, I appreciate you being here and for bringing that question to me, and for reminding me that it took you 30 years praying for me rather than just 15. And then thank you for the moderators, guys. Appreciate you very, very much. Again, I'll be on with Ken Michael in 5 million quadrillion years, according to Titus. No, I'll be on with Ken Michael. I think we record the day before and then it gets published that next day. And then I'll be on with Gary, Pastor Gary, at noon on, what day did I say that was? What day? That is on Wednesday at noon, or Wednesday at 1. And then Thursday at noon, I'll be on with David Fiorosa, Worldview Matters. So you should see me about 3 times this week, aside from now. And that's it. Please don't get mad at me for my views on voting. Don't email me. Again, it's just a kind of standard thought process I have across every aspect of my life. If you don't participate, don't complain. If you don't help clean up, don't complain. If you don't do your chores, don't, like I use this for everything. So, um, and if you still feel that strongly about protesting, quit paying your taxes. That will be the biggest protest you can do. It's going to cost you everything, but you know, that's your that is your strongest signal you can send to the government. And hey, man, if enough people quit paying taxes, who knows, man? Maybe we could get something right. But I think we would all have to agree on that at the exact same time. So maybe that's after the election, and maybe the election's stolen again. Then I would definitely say, hey, I'm done. I'm done paying taxes. So. Just Vicky says you first. That's awesome. You guys are an amazing crowd. Very, very, very much thankful for y'all. Yeah, hey, man, if you got to hold your nose and vote, I get it. I'm not defending Trump. I'm not defending his morals. I'm not defending any Republican. I'm not defending any of that. I can only answer for myself. I can't answer for anybody else. Yeah, you guys have a great, great week, and keep looking up. As I say, hands and feet ready to serve, head on a swivel, and keep your eyes focused on our blessed hope, Jesus Christ. Because remember, the rapture isn't just some standalone thing. The rapture is Jesus. It is Him coming for us to take us to be where He is forevermore. So God bless you guys, Maranatha, and Linda, yeah. We'll all be in jail together. That'd be okay with me. All right. Take care, guys.